Good morning. It is May 11th, and this is a meeting of the Joint Legislative Management Committee. We are continuing our work on thinking about next steps for the legislature in terms of how we will come back together post-pandemic and after the emergency order is lifted. We're going to hear shortly from Kevin Moore about information technology. Before we do that, however, I wanted to just give the speaker and the two chairs of institutions just a couple minutes to update on both the Joint Rules Committee meeting that we had yesterday, and then how the Capitol bill language is coming along. So I apologize, it wasn't on the agenda, but I do think it would be great for this committee to get a little bit of an update about things that happened since the last time we met. So, Madam Speaker, I apologize for putting you on the spot, but if you could just give us a brief update about joint rules yesterday, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure, happy to. So yesterday, joint rules met to review our jurisdiction of our authority and how we proceed with how we reopen joint committees, hearings, and joint assemblies for the rest of the year. And right now, House Rules has JRS 24, which the Senate sent over, which basically said whatever, we'll come back in person at the end of when the governor's now I need more coffee, emergency declaration is lifted, or we're back in January, whatever is the latter. And the House has been looking at a different position, and so joint rules looked over the House's approach that is being worked on, that we return 30 days after the emergency health restrictions are lifted, and we're in a conversation about what does that look like for joint committees and how do we work. So I think in terms of the jurisdiction questions that have been out there, joint rules will make the determination of how we come back, and this committee will focus more on the staff transition and more of the HR issues and things like that. But having said that, it's really important that we're working closely together. There is a lot of cross membership on both, so that is helpful as well. So we are scheduling another meeting to hear from the Sergeant at Arms and our head of IT, hopefully for tomorrow. And we'll keep you posted. And we'll make sure you get the invitation too if you want to see the agenda and watch. So that's the update.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. If you could just speak to the issue of the proposed joint meetings, perhaps this summer or fall, and talking about what a hybrid, just sort of the nature of our conversation yesterday. I know Digger had a piece about it this morning, but I'd love to bring this committee up to speed just about those conversations.
So yeah, that we are looking at if we come back after something is lifted, what does that look like? We have four rooms right now that are prepared to take in any joint or any committees that can continue to be open and transparent to the public. So we would have Zoom still available for witnesses, and we would still be connected to live stream on YouTube. So we have the opportunity to test out what that would look like coming back in person or in a hybrid fashion. And one of the questions that we were considering is, how if members wanted to call in instead of being there in person. So I think there are some details that we're still working out, but I think the general consensus is how can we come back safely and have some in-person meetings so that we can test it out and learn what works and what doesn't, especially with staff and opening up the building so we're ready in January.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Appreciate that update. Mm-hmm. And now, Senator Kitchell.
So Speaker, Madam Speaker, the question I have, I'm just trying to relate this. So like justice oversight joint committees, we've got a number of them. So those committees you anticipate would meet? There are 4 rooms that would accommodate the numbers adequately, probably room 10, room 11.
Room 9, yeah, room 9's also been transformed into a committee room.
Is that the post office?
Yeah, it's the coat room.
Okay, okay. And what's the 4th?
Legislative Lounge?
Thank you, the Legislative Lounge, and we have 2 rooms available. I think we have 2 spaces available in the basement at 133.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, we are also ensuring that, and we would work together to ensure that when we have a meeting that might be popular and bring more people in the room, that is not safe, that we have overflow space available. And that is something we've been talking a lot about.
Representative Ansel.
Thank you. So I'm assuming that that includes the committees that will meet in the building, include this committee and joint fiscal?
Yep, that's correct.
Yeah. Thank you.
I will just caution members, that's the concept. We haven't had a vote yet, but
Sure.
That's the direction we're heading in.
The direction we're working.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that update. And now turning to the chairs of institutions. And for those of you watching, I always try to let people know Senator Benning is a member of this committee. Representative Emmons does not sit on this committee, but we've invited her to be part of these conversations because it's intricately involved with the work of her committee. Senator Benning, any update that we need to know about language that may be in the Capitol bill?
Well, there's been a lot of negotiating going on behind the scenes between parties. I'm going to turn it over to Alice because she's working on the most immediate draft.
Thank you, Joe. Representative Emmons.
Thank you. My committee is finalizing some language. The part that is of most interest here is the State House Advisory Committee, and we have language that we have worked up. It's session law. It's not changing the statute in terms of the advisory committee, but the session law would have the committee review and make recommendations on any space or design proposals. And the committee would take into account the Freeman report. And also the language indicates that that committee would consult with legislators, legislative staff, and relevant stakeholders on the space needs. And then the committee would also have assistance, as Senator Benning and I spoke with BGS about this, and they offered as well that the committee would have an assistant from a planning architect that's housed within BGS to help, because you can look at where people need to go, but you also need to know what the space availability and limitations are. And then by August 15th, the committee would submit a report with its recommendations to this committee, Management Committee, Joint Rules Committee, as well as the House and Senate Institutions Committees. And
wonderful.
That's the direction language that we put in. We also, based on conversations that happened here a week ago, the membership for this particular duty would be 4 members from the House, 4 members from the Senate. So we upped that by 1 member on each body and kept the rest of the membership the same. So that's where we are for that.
Representative Emmons. And is there any update you can provide at this point in terms of the space swap that we've been talking about? And if not, that's fine. I'm just curious if we're close to an agreement there with the administration.
We're working on it.
Okay.
We're working on it. There's 3 possible sites, and we're meeting. Kevin Moore had a walkthrough of these 3 sites yesterday with BGS. And in my conversations with Deputy Secretary of the Administration, Kristen Klauser, last evening, I really recommended that the players have a Zoom meeting and sit down and go through all the nuances. There's 3 places that we're looking at. First floor, 133 State Street, possibly 4 Aiken, or possibly the 3rd floor of 6 Baldwin, which is ground level easy access, and Kevin could have all of his operation in that particular site. The servers, which are currently in the basement of the State House, would, regardless of which site our IT folks go in, the servers would be moved to 133 State Street, first floor, where Agency of Digital Services servers are. So regardless of where the operational folks in Kevin's shop and other needs he needs, the server will be in 133 State Street. So we're making progress. There's no agreement. We still have to work in terms of space limitations.
Sure.
And costs for fit up. And we do have money in previous capital bills that could be used.
Thank you, Representative Emmons, and thank you to you and Senator Benning for working hard behind the scenes, trying to smooth the space swap. I know we are committed to making sure that we have an agreement that works for both the legislature and the administration. And so I appreciate that extra amount of time and effort you've put into that. Senator Kitchell.
Now, what is the time frame? Obviously, I would think fairly soon in terms of what space is negotiated. I mean, the potential sites seem to be, it really makes a nice little State House kind of complex in many ways. So I was just wondering what you time. And the other question about the study committee, because I know Senate institutions took testimony from staff. So you're talking about consulting with staff. I'm just wondering how that would differ or augment, or, you know, are we having multiple conversations on the same desires or issues? I was just wondering how that language builds or reflects the work the two committees have already done.
So
Representative Emmons.
in terms of the time frame for moving the IT, as soon as there's a decision made, BGS can start working on any fit up that's required. So that could feasibly, Kevin and his shop could be moving in over the summer and early fall, depending on how much fit up. In terms of the advisory committee taking testimony, I would assume, you know what assume means, to incorporate the testimony that was in Senator Benning's committee, but also do a deeper dive, have further conversations with all those folks. And I believe, I'm not sure, Joe, but I believe, cat fight. I believe that the testimony was received more in terms of legislative staff going to 133 instead of 2 Aiken and 4 Aiken. So that may change the dynamic a little bit.
Yeah, part of the reason for having Senate institutions do a dive at this point is that all of the conversations that are going to end up in the Capitol bill were in part based on the testimony that we were taking in. So trying to get the Capitol bill out the door before adjournment was critical, but all of the witnesses that came before institutions were told this was the tip of an iceberg, and that the conversations are likely to continue, and people may very well be called back. Appropriate committees are dealing with the issues and how to make them into concrete. But nothing could move in the Capitol bill until we had some basic direction on where things were happening. So for instance, when Kevin Moore is taking a tour of 6 Baldwin, the reason that process began was because we began to identify one of the flaws in the Freeman report. They did not take into account operational dynamics. Something easy like the Capitol Police have to be positioned close to an elevator to allow them access. That wasn't covered in the Freeman report. But getting the ideas out there on the table as quickly as possible in order to finalize the language in the Capitol bill was critical, which is why we went through that exercise.
Thank you, Senator Benning. Thank you, Representative Emmons. And, you know, just to sort of make explicit the obvious, there's a certain amount of anxiety that most Vermonters are feeling about going back to work in person. And when you put on top of that the issue of we'll be moving staff around because of a boiler installation plan that predates COVID, thinking about how we can bring people back together safely. So there is a heightened level of anxiety knowing that people may be returning to work, but in different spaces than they're used to, and really wanting to be careful and making sure that that space, as you said, Senator Benning, the flow works. So many more conversations to be had. I want to, at this point, because I know it can so quickly get away from us, I want to make sure I turn the meeting over at this point to Kevin Moore. For those of you watching, he is in charge of IT for us here at the Capitol. And there's a lot of different directions we can go in, Kevin. I think one of the things that this committee is interested in getting a briefing on is, where are we right now in terms of, you know, the IT that we have that is utilized and ready to go for any kind of joint hearings? What is the IT support you're going to need going forward? And how do you see the next few months going, and then that extended time to January? You've got a lot on your plate. You have a big job ahead of you, and we want to be of service to you and make sure that you are asking from us the decision points that you need taken care of so that you can do your job. So I'm just going to turn it over to you, Kevin, and then make sure we have plenty of time for senators and representatives to ask you questions. So thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee, for having me back again. I'll start with the very short-term piece, talking about August and bringing joint committees back. Just a little bit of clarity surrounding the current status of our existing spaces. They are still set up as they were for a potential hybrid session, very ad hoc in their original setup, and not as ideal as they should be for coming back. So, for example, we still have that dreaded wide angle view in those spaces, which we still need to work on. It's a lot of detail work, which we're looking at. We have the fundamentals in place, but we want to add some cameras. We want to add some microphones, better speakers, additional screens, depending on the room. So, for example, room 10 and room 9 are smaller, more intimate spaces when compared to room 11 and the lounge. So you don't necessarily need public address systems in there. Room 10 does have a small one, room 9 doesn't. As you start moving towards those larger spaces, room 11 has a public address system, the lounge does not. So that's a consideration. How do we make sure that we offer closed captioning, continue to offer closed captioning, not only across Zoom, but in the space, where, you know, assuming folks are going to be observing the proceedings in person. More screens. We have to pull screens back from alternate locations back into these spaces, make sure they're set up at a proper angle. So again, the audience, the witnesses, the members of the committee can see everything that's happening, to include potential remote testimony or remote committee member participation. Hearing assistance. Hearing assistance is always a challenge depending on the space. Once we, again, get into that larger room, it really becomes a challenge that we have to contend with. So we do have some systems we acquired. We want to make sure we integrate those properly, make sure we understand what that looks like, and can fluidly function at the committee staff level and the operational level in August. The really large outstanding piece for those spaces for us is, what are the table layouts going to look like? There is a strong desire to get back around a table, and I completely understand that. The hardest part we have to contend with an around the table conversation is camera angles and seeing somebody. In our existing committee room setup, if you recall, generally speaking, there's a screen at the end right behind the witness. That's also typically where the camera has been mounted. You have to look through one or two people, or the committee member has to lean quite dramatically forward in order to be seen on that camera. And it's still a wide angle shot of the entire committee. So we want to mitigate that as best as possible. We have one 360-degree camera, which does have some smarter technology in it to frame the active speakers at any given point. But it's not the only one on the market. We want to test a couple more. We want to make sure that we're getting the best quality camera out there, and then figuring out how to lace some of these additional views together in this Zoom specific world. is a challenge. We want to make sure that the witness can be seen properly and framed properly, the committee can be seen and framed properly, and that it's a clean presentation to the public in general. So there's a lot of detail work. It's really what it comes down to. For those spaces, it's a lot of detail work, pulling equipment back from existing locations, repurposing it, and then filling in the blanks, which is the 360-degree camera, closed captioning, which is new to our process here, and potential public address systems. Going forward into January, one of the largest decision points that we need sooner versus later is the understanding of the physical space. Where are we going to be? How many rooms are we looking at? What are the orientations of those spaces? The same considerations we have for these 4 first rooms, and then the understanding of the expectation for technology integration. So we can assume, and that's what we're doing at this point, is assuming that we want to continue all the service level that we currently provide and integrate that into the existing committee rooms for January. That's a heavy lift. It's an aggressive time frame. We will have to retain contractors in order to help us through that effort. So you have the RFP process, you have the contractual process, and then you have the actual scheduling of that work in order to make sure folks can come in. Obviously, supply chains, they're not nearly as challenging as what they were last summer, but it's still something that we have to have a strong consideration for. As far as space goes, so Representative Emmons touched on actual space considerations. Those conversations are still evolving. We certainly want to make sure that our space is as contiguous as possible to make sure that our operations are as smooth as possible given the size of our staff. And we want to continue to ensure ease of access, not only for staff, but for legislators too. We want to make sure folks can get to our offices, get to training locations, seek the IT help that they need, and make sure that we can get to you all quickly in the event that you need us there. I hope I covered most of what you requested. I'm happy to answer specific questions or cover more detail as I have available. So I'll turn it back over and seek questions at this point.
Thank you so much, Kevin. For folks who may not have seen it, I think given that Kevin mentioned several times the issue of the wide angle lens, if you don't know what the concern is, you should make sure to look at the official photo of the Bidens and the Carters that was released this week to show you the kind of distortion that can happen from a wide angle lens. It's a great, quick tutorial on what can happen. So Senator Benning.
Kevin, I'm not sure if you were present during the testimony of the media in my committee, but Jay Barton, the GM of WCIX, offered to lend the state their expertise in trying to develop the correct camera situations for whatever that's worth.
I appreciate that, Senator. We'll certainly take that into consideration as we go forward. We are likely to retain some audiovisual experts during this process to make sure that we get the highest quality available, and certainly welcome comments, commentary, and suggestions from the media who do this all the time.
Any other questions or comments? Kevin, anything else you want us to be thinking about that may not be on our radar screens, because you sit in a particular seat in the State House and see all of these moving parts that we don't necessarily think about. So what's top of mind for you that's concerning for you that we may not have on our radar screen?
Thank you for the question. The piece that's unanswered and probably unanswerable at this point is, with all of the potential moving pieces, whether it's staff, legislators, committee rooms, we do have to take into consideration all of the back-end infrastructure, whether or not it currently exists in any of these other spaces under consideration, what we need to do in order to accommodate that infrastructure, and in some cases acquire the equipment to put that in place, and then fit up office spaces. That's going to be no easy lift in coordination with these committee room spaces as well. This is a heavy lift by January. So understanding the physical space is really the first key step to this process for us.
That's helpful. Thank you. Representative Ansel.
That's all very helpful. And just tying it into the earlier discussion, I continue to, and maybe it exists somewhere and I haven't seen it, but feel the need for a timeline. This decision needs to be made when. And I don't know who puts that together. If we have timelines, for this task and timelines for this task, but they don't mesh, then we may find ourselves in a difficult situation. And clearly, the IT infrastructure is critical to having the other pieces work. So I just throw that out as every time I listen to this, this is what my anxiety level goes up over.
Kevin may have that as part of
For his
just
part.
project implementation.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. We need a Gantt chart to track this back plan from
Right.
when we come back in January. I'm
Looks
optimistic. I'm coming back.
That's right.
And the advisory committee, the timeline for that work,
Yes.
and they need to work together.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure there's others as well. And I just Kevin's got his hand up, so
Yes,
maybe
exactly.
got an
Well,
answer to my question.
yes, exactly. Kevin, thank you.
Thank you. So again, only a small part of the conversation here. And we certainly appreciate the need for IT integration and the criticality of it, but we are still a small part of the conversation. I think the timeline from our perspective that was put out from Freeman, French, and Freeman in that report is fairly reasonable.
Okay.
We have passed some of those as we currently stand. So catching up is certainly of concern for me. I'm not certain, I know it was said, but I didn't write it down a moment ago. I'm not certain what the date is for the report back from this other committee, the advisory committee. But understanding specifically where people go isn't going to be critical for our operations. It's what spaces exist, and then we can backfill and adjust as we understand who's going to be in that space. The operational needs of the basic operational needs of each office from an IT perspective are similar. So we can plan that. It's really the committee rooms versus what would be considered legislative staff spaces. Hopefully that's helpful.
Senator Benning.
Yeah, I want to go back to Janet's anxiety proclamation. I want to just make sure that this committee understands that there is also anxiety in the legislative staff who are concerned about whether COVID is still in our lives in January. I just want to make, from my perspective, a statement that Zoom is our fallback position, and trying to force feed some hybrid mechanism may not be the smartest way to go. If COVID is there, Zoom is available, and we should be using that because legislative staff are going to be put into a very awkward position. On the other hand, I completely agree with Jane. I want to go back. In fact, I'm back right now, and this building is screaming out for all of us to be back here. And I think that the public, as expressed by the press especially, have a right to be back here with us. But if COVID is still rearing its ugly head, I want to assure the staff, we always have Zoom as the fallback position.
Thank you, Senator Benning. Madam Speaker.
Thank you. So I just want to make sure because we are nearing the end of this legislative session and making some decisions about the short term, is there anything, Kevin, that you need from us for the next, to set us up for the transition?
So thank you, Madam Speaker. So certainly authorization to start purchasing equipment is helpful. I know that those considerations are in process now, I believe, with the budget bill. So that would be helpful. And then again, the space considerations as far as where we're going. And I guess finally, what I would put out there is depending on where these conversations go, it's important to understand that we do not retain on our staff an AV specialist. So if we continue to expand our AV presence, we may have to consider having an AV specialist to maintain and help operate that equipment, which would be in use in every space at that point in time. So we want to make sure it's maintained in high quality. We want to make sure the presentation is high quality. And IT people, while we certainly converge in the AV space, we are not AV professionals.
That is a really important distinction for us to keep in mind, and not one that I'd considered, Kevin. So thank you. Representative Emmons?
Yes, I just want to also let the committee know in terms of trying to figure out what committee rooms could be used or not used, or what rooms in the State House could be used or not used based on the capacity of the airflow. Senator Benning and I last week had a conversation with the commissioner of BGS, and we both requested that BGS go in there and do an airflow analysis of all the committee rooms, the House and Senate chambers. And Janet Miller is working with BGS to have other rooms and hallways also done. So at least if we have an airflow capacity analysis, it may be correct, it may not be correct, but at least it's a baseline that we can work from to know the capacity of each room and hallway in the building. So at least that's a starting point. So I just wanted to put that out there. That will help us in making some of these decisions that Kevin is asking.
Senator Kitchell.
Well, that raises a comment or a connection with a comment I think Senator Benning made last week about the air exchange, the HVAC needs in the State House. And so is this sort of the preliminary work that would then determine what improvements or the plan would be for an HVAC system? I'm just trying to connect what BGS is doing now. Of course, for some of us, we just like to open the windows, but that's not always possible. So, so my question is that connected to a larger plan around the whole air exchange needs of the building?
Really the very first step. You can't really design an HVAC system unless you know where your problem is. And so I would say, yes, this is the first step, but it's another reason to get all of this moving as quickly as possible.
And they're starting that next week, you said, Alice?
They've already started it.
Oh, this week.
And,
Right.
yeah.
We'll have the results this week.
Oh, thank you.
So if there are no more questions, I want to thank Kevin for joining us. I'm sure this is the first of many conversations we'll be having as we work together to get the State House working for all of us. I'm wondering if it makes sense for us, Senator Benning, to charge you as the member of this committee and as the chair of institutions with helping us to integrate the various timelines and making sure that there's communication between each of the entities. And if you could pull together certainly Representative Emmons and anyone else from this committee you might need or outside this committee to help us, as Jane said, perhaps pull together a Gantt chart so we understand how it's all interacting. I think that would go a long way to helping us feel more at ease as we make these really important decisions. Does that feel possible for you, Senator Benning?
Certainly not impossible. Making sure I have the right committees that are targeted for that particular set of stats is important. Do I understand that it is now official that it will be the Joint Rules Committee making the decision on when and how we go back?
That is correct, Senator Benning.
Okay.
I see Representative Ansel.
I was just going to suggest that it might be helpful to have, I don't know if it's Legislative Council and possibly Arlene involved in sort of mapping out the tasks. It's nice of me to volunteer them, but
Yes, sir.
I think particularly the Arlene's connection on the HR front, I think is important given the concerns on the part of staff.
Absolutely.
And maybe Catherine Benham, who's worked pretty
Sure.
closely.
Catherine's a good idea. Yeah, thank you.
On space or
Yeah.
other issues.
All volunteer assistants will be welcomed by this subcommittee of one.
It's nice of me to volunteer them.
Yes, that's right. Thank you, Senator. I want to just also flag for you that in all likelihood, we will have another meeting of this committee later in this week. So be looking for a doodle poll to try to find a time when we can do that and a proposed agenda. So at this point, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, Senator Kitchell. All those in favor say aye.
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 This meeting is adjourned.